back. Ahmad Hardy, hard to beat, and he is off to the races. Hardy with the cutback. Touchdown, Ahmad Hardy. Saying. Winds up. Lacey up the middle. He won. Lacey's in the clear. It's a foot race. The Hurricanes cannot run him down. A lightning strike for Ole Miss. Tony has space. Malachi Tony still running. Touchdown Miami. Electric with the ball in his hands.
This is the CFF Sites Preseason Preview Series, and today we're talking running backs. Mike, we finished the quarterback show last week. Another week now, we're getting into the running backs before we close off this series with receivers and tight ends. But much like we did last time, we're gonna talk strategy. We're gonna talk players that we're targeting in the early rounds, players in the mid rounds, late rounds, maybe some guys that we're staying away from, position battles that we're keeping our eyes on, and maybe a few superlatives here at the end, some quick hitters just to throw out a few more names. For those of you all that have come in, make sure you're getting the updates in the preseason fantasy draft guide. Mike has touched up some of the projections this week. We've gone ahead and added some things into the guide itself. We've added some schedule grid heat maps as well that you guys may find useful as you're targeting players here. Or trying to decide between maybe one player or another. Could be useful heat maps as well. But Mike, running back strategy, we've been doing especially you've been doing a ton of drafts, and something we spoke about, we didn't spend a lot of time prepping for this show, but we kind of spent some time talking about how it was going to unfold a little bit from a strategy standpoint, because every draft that we've been in so far, man, hot and heavy running backs early. Every draft, right? It almost feels like 20 running backs are off the board before a fifth wide receiver, or in some cases, a third or fourth quarterback. Seems to be the norm this draft season, right? And not too much different from years past, but it does feel that the security at the running back is right there at the top.
Yeah, I was just looking over, and this has been consistent, but I just looked at my latest two drafts. I'm in a Champions League full FBS draft right now, and then I recently finished up our Tadpole draft. In the Champions League full FBS, 19 running backs went in the first two rounds. Again, that's been consistent for the most part across all drafts this offseason. And then, to my surprise, even in the Tadpole, just as UPS shows up, so my dog is probably going to go crazy here in a second. But we just finished up the Tadpole, which is P4 only. 18 of the 24 picks went running back. So no matter the format, they are going off the board hot and heavy.
Yeah, so look, this may knock out two birds with one stone when we get to the receivers, but just thinking about running back strategy for this year's drafts, I mean, when are you not taking a running back in the first couple of rounds? That would be the question, right? Let's think about that for a second from a draft strategy, and I'll just tee it up myself, right? Like, I don't know, like Brad Jackson there in full FBS, right? He's probably a guy that I would take and consider in the first round. You and I agree that there's four really good receivers, right? And depending on what your format is, you can make a case for any of those four going in the first round. But man, I'll tell you, for me, other than those five names, I would probably be hot and heavy on running back the first couple of rounds, or, because of that short list, I'd probably have to go running back two of my first three picks.
Yeah, I think my personal preference definitely this draft season has been to lock down that anchor wide receiver in the first round, preferably, because I do think that all four options between Bo Sparks, Malachi Tony, Jeremiah Smith, and then Easton Messer, I like to lock those down first. And then in those second to third, fourth rounds, depending how the draft shakes out, obviously, that's kind of where I like to land my next 2, 3, 4 running backs to fill out that room. That's just how I've built most of my rosters and how I kind of like that composition. I would say for those that are just getting into draft season, depending on how many rounds that you guys draft, I typically like to get my top 4 running backs. Want them locked in stone probably by round 8, because then there's a second tier drop off to where you're starting to see question marks, whether it's just talent related with the running backs going in that beyond round 8, or the situation on their team, whether it might be a committee or what have you. So try to land your top 4 running backs, whether that's 2 starters, 2 backups, maybe 2 starters and a flex in those first 8 rounds, and then you can attack from there.
And of course, if we're talking strategy, there is a little bit of a curveball in this year's draft, right? Because let's just address the elephant in the room. We've got to talk about Ahmad Hardy, Missouri running back. Before the gunshot wound incident, he was the consensus #1 running back on the board. No questions asked. Probably in most circles, overall #1 pick. Right?
Or 2, right? With Keywan Lacey.
Right?
Yeah.
Top 2 picks.
Yep.
We've gotten some good news recently out of media days. We've heard that he is ahead of schedule. Some folks are kind of projecting that we're looking at possibly a 5 to 8 week timeline. And you and I talked about this. Depending on Missouri's schedule, what does that look like? How will he participate in preseason camp? Will he be ready in week 1? Would they even use him in week 1? Would they wait till they get through the preseason schedule? You and I had him ranked around 12, 15 to kind of open up the guides when we launched it. We've slid him down. And if you want to add to this, you certainly, we're going to add to it, but here's the reason why. There's just uncertainty. And we're talking about how these drafts are so running back heavy at the top. You don't want to swing and miss. Now, something that came out after media days is what you and I both are comfortable with, is that we feel like he's definitely playing this year now. You're no longer going to take a swing and miss and that he's not going to play. The big question now becomes the value when he returns, what he gives you, and a little bit of the schedule. Because if he misses the first half of the season, and you referenced this to when we spoke yesterday, the schedule stiffens up for Missouri at the back half of the season. So ideally, you want to have him more for the front half. Just don't know if we're going to get him there, right? Like, what am I missing there that you can add on top of the Ahmad Hardy situation from our lens right now, from a draft perspective?
Yeah, so I think you reference it too. The good news is, coming out of media days, I feel pretty good that Ahmad Hardy's going to play this year, which wasn't the case before Eli Drinkwitz spoke. Now he said a 5 to 8 week return to football recovery process, whatever that means. But if it goes 8 weeks, that's taking you into the season. And then is he 100% at that 8 weeks potentially? Is he still in like a ramp up period? Because then if he's ramping up in those first, 3 weeks, how much does he play, if at all, against Arkansas Pine Bluff? I think they could beat Kansas with or without Ahmad Hardy, right?
Yeah.
And then I think Troy is after that, which is, I don't think they're, a mid-tier Sun Belt team. So how much do you see him in those first 3 weeks? And then you spoke on the back half, or the final month of the season. We subscribe to the start your studs, but then you're going to face Texas, Georgia, and Oklahoma in a 4-week span, which are all 3 projected top 10 defenses. So I don't know. Are you comfortable starting him in that first month? Maybe, maybe not. Are you comfortable starting him in the last month? Maybe, maybe not. So it's just a lot of, I don't know. It's just a lot of uneasiness, you said.
And you know what? It almost feels now, with Hardy seemingly set to return, and Jamal Roberts, who is more than capable to handle the load, especially early if Hardy doesn't play. Man, you're almost in a situation where that's a handcuff situation, and you're looking at spending 2 of your first 4 picks on those 2 guys, right?
Yeah.
It is a roll of the dice.
It's a roll of the dice. I will admit that I just the way the draft, the tadpole draft for me shook out, I took Ahmad Hardy at 3-1. This was before Eli Drinkwitz spoke. And I had heard from the San Diego draft that Jamal Roberts went in the 12th round. They must have had some casuals in that draft, because in my draft he went 5-6. So I thought I could at least wait till like the 7th round to grab Jamal Roberts as my handcuff. Didn't happen. Didn't feel too good just having Ahmad Hardy and no Jamal Roberts as my backup. So I have right now I have Ahmad Hardy as RB37, and I have Jamal Roberts RB38. I think you need to. This is one of those situations you absolutely have to handcuff, in my opinion.
Before we get into the players, there's 2 points that I want to make about this situation. And that is, one, I cannot preach this enough. Don't be over anxious to have your drafts too soon, especially if you're having redrafts. 2 to 3 weeks before the season is plenty enough time to get enough information, have drafts, and gather as much intel as you can, so these type of incidents don't affect any type of drafts for any owners in your league. But it also underscores another point sometimes. I think sometimes we overvalue ADP. And the reason I say that is, when you like a guy in college fantasy football, you take him. And if it's 2 or 3 rounds ahead of his ADP, you get him, because you never know if somebody in your league likes him 2 to 3 rounds earlier than your ADP. The ADP gives us great value context, but sometimes when you like a player, you just have to go get him, because you never know who else likes that guy. I know.
I agree to an extent.
I know. Look, I'm waiting for the rebuttal on this, because you're a big ADP guy.
I'm not even a big ADP guy. I feel like go get your guy, but to an extent, right? Yeah. If it's
at the value,
if it's a 2 to 3 round difference, fine. But you also want to reference ADP, so you're not drafting the guy 10 rounds over.
I get it.
Where he should go. So just caveat there.
Well, let's get into the players, man. And look, for obvious reasons, I mean, we're not talking about players 1 through 5, 1 through 6. We're going to do like we did with the quarterbacks, right? Like, I feel like talking running backs, we can sit here all day and just go down a list and talk for 4 hours, okay? Top 5 rounds is kind of what we're looking at. Who are those guys in the top 5 rounds that you're looking at? Let's kind of start off with 1 or 2 that you're looking at right now. That's been kind of there for you.
Yeah. So I know I have Michigan stuff on and in the background, but I did graduate from Northern Illinois, so I have to always tout Telly Johnson. And one of these years I'll be right on the NIU running back. But I do feel like this is the year, because I just think the situation is setting up for him perfectly. He's obviously a veteran on the offense. He's a senior now. The combined amount of rushing attempts in that backfield behind Telly Johnson is 14. 14 combined collegiate carries behind him. There's no Chavon Wright this year, right? So that should be Telly Johnson's backfield. And he, Chavon Wright, I think, outrushed him last year, but analytically, like, all the advanced stats pointed to Telly Johnson was the better player. I think it was just a favoritism situation where, Chavon Wright played under the previous OC there, so he wanted to ride with his guy. But I just, he had a massive breakaway percentage on Pro Football Focus. It was double what Chavon Wright's was last year. Averaged 5.7 yards per carry, 4.66 yards after contact, which are really strong numbers. And I do think that the addition, which we updated the guide, obviously, with Taron Dickens, the late transfer addition, I think he benefits everybody involved, right? He's going to help out the passing offense, which, I don't think was going to be very
He's going to help open up the offense a little bit.
Yeah. Jalen Macon was the projected starter before that, and he is inept as a passer. So I think Dickens' addition helps the offense overall. And I think an underrated aspect is that Jalen Macon was going to vulture some rushing touchdowns on the ground, because that's his strong suit, right? Running. Dickens can move, but he's smaller, on the smaller side too. So he's not really a threat once they get to the goal line and stuff. So I really like the situation for Telly Johnson there, obviously playing in well, no, I was going to say, obviously playing in the MAC, not the case
Yeah.
anymore, but just situationally, there's zero experience behind him. I think he's set for a heavy workload.
Yeah, and I'll lead into mine and then fire it back to you with your second name as well. And this one feels a little obvious, but I feel could be a little bit under the radar right now. And last year I was very high on Jeremiah Love. I remember, we were talking about that, and you had questioned me about Love being high up in the rankings, and he was a monster last year. But Aeneas Williams at Notre Dame for me. I mean, all we hear about is how Notre Dame could be a national title contention. We talk about how the schedule's not overly difficult. We know the system is going to pound the rock most often. And, where you had Price and Love last year, Williams is really the only known commodity that we have, right? So it feels like rock solid running back one there. And, we're not going to get into position battles on this, but if we're going to talk in position battles, that running back two at Notre Dame is the one where we're really not 100% certain. But I feel like Williams is a really safe pick high up in the early rounds, and he's more of a second round pick, I would think, right now. But man, it's a name that I wanted to reference because he's not a guy that people are taking in early first round, late first rounds. But man, you feel like between Price and Love, they had over 300 rush attempts in their top two backs last year. And if he gets over 175 rush attempts in that offense, he's going to score his share of touchdowns as well.
Yeah, he's an interesting one that I just haven't drafted a ton of, and it could very well backfire on me because I like the system under Mike Denbrock
Yep.
better than the actual player, right? And I feel like we've only seen Aeneas Williams as in that like third down pass catching role as opposed to a guy that can handle 200 plus touches, which he very well could.
Yeah.
So I don't know my hesitancy on it. I guess there's just not a lot of proof in the pudding with him thus far. But the system is obviously great. I mean, you dating back to LSU and even in Cincinnati with Mike Denbrock calling plays, as a
Yep.
team they're going to rush for 30 touchdowns,
Yeah.
and you're not getting that from quarterback CJ Carr, right? He'll get 4 to 5, but he's not going to be a Desmond Ritter or
Yeah.
Jaden Daniels, right? So yeah, I think. I don't know how it's exactly going to play out, but I think just as good as an offense overall, he should be solid.
Yeah, and look, the second name for me, Kendrick Raphael, coming in from Cal, right? Last year at Cal, he had over 200, I think he had 230 plus rush attempts and had over 30 receptions. So the guy touched the ball 260 times. Now, if you think back to a year ago, remember we were looking at TJ Harden coming in from UCLA to SMU. We projected him at running back one, but there was a little bit of uncertainty because you still had Chris Johnson Jr. there as well. Derek McFall was a name that we were talking about coming out of spring, right? Never really panned out, but that was a name. There was uncertainty around the running back spot as far as who was going to be their lock solid running back one. Well, now you've got Chris Johnson Jr. transfers over to Clemson. You've got Raphael coming in from Cal, and it just feels like rock solid running back one. SMU should be contenders in the ACC again. We talked about on the quarterback podcast, Kevin Jennings. His health makes that offense go. SMU is going to be good once again on the offensive side of the football. And Raphael, you were talking about the proof wasn't in the pudding with Williams, which leaves a little bit of a question mark and uncertainty about his durability. But we don't have the questions about that with Raphael, with how much he touched the rock last year at Cal and what he's bringing to SMU. And I'll reference again, because this was a point that we made last year. There's not a lot of great defenses in the ACC. You could be scared of Miami, and maybe that's it. Maybe the other defense to be
Clemson,
nervous
maybe.
about
Yeah,
might be a
Clemson.
Florida State and might be an SMU, and that's their own team. They're not playing the Mustangs, right? So Kendrick Raphael is another name for me that I really, really like jumping on this year.
Yeah, I was going to hit on him earlier, but I'll just touch on it quick now. What really stuck out to me in the spring research was just how much the coaching staff really liked Raphael. And the concern was that he had, he had a lot of touches last year, but he had a low yards per carry average, and so people were concerned how that might translate to a new situation this year. But the running backs coach really made it known that they felt like the offensive line for Cal was the reason for
Yep.
his low yards per carry average, and then they said the running backs coach said point blank, we see a feature running back in Kendrick Raphael, and we obviously love to hear that for college fantasy.
Yep. What about the other guy that you're looking at in the first 5 rounds that's really jumping out to you right now?
Yeah, it's Duke Scott for NC State, and I probably wouldn't go any higher than the fifth round. I've seen him go in the fourth round. I feel more comfortable with him in the fifth round though, or later on. I'm getting concerned that I have too many shares of Duke Scott right now. Just the biggest concern for me, if you're looking at NC State, I think is their backup quarterback.
Yes, that's correct.
Will Wilson led the team with 10 rushing
10 rushing
touchdowns.
Yeah, double-digit
last
scores
year.
last year.
Yeah, and he's a big boy if you watch some of those games last year. So I think that's the biggest concern with Duke Scott. But he showed obviously last year that he can handle the rock when given the chance. He had 196 yards against Georgia Tech, 100 yards in the bowl game. This is a coaching staff that really has employed a committee approach in the past, but I think, just based on the quotes, we're going to see the 18 touches per game, I think, that we saw from Hollywood Smothers last year.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to cover off on was, those scoring opportunities with Will Wilson, the backup quarterback. So Will Wilson had 21 red zone rushing attempts last year. Hollywood Smothers only had 13. So obviously that makes sense with how many touchdowns they scored. So Hollywood Smothers had 13 on 160 attempts. Duke Scott had 13 red zone attempts on 100 rushing carries. So it seems like they feel more comfortable with Duke Scott in the red zone maybe than they did Hollywood Smothers last year. Probably helps that he's 25 pounds heavier than Hollywood Smothers is. So I like it. There's been articles that Duke Scott's gotten the #1 jersey for NC State, which has some significance to that program. And he also made the annual Freaks list by Bruce Feldman of The Athletic too. So you always like to hear that for athleticism purposes. So I do like Duke Scott a lot. I probably wouldn't go any higher than the fifth round though when drafting him.
Yeah, look, I like Scott too. I was going to make that point. I knew he had at least 20 pounds on Hollywood Smothers for sure. Will Wilson just makes me nervous for both C.J. Bailey and Duke Scott. And look, even when we're talking quarterback, C.J. Bailey's got at least 5 rushing touchdowns each of the last 2 years, right? So you wonder, if Wilson doesn't get the snaps, which he probably will, right? Man, how those touchdowns could be distributed between C.J. Bailey and Duke Scott. There's some tremendous upside there if they decide to say, "Hey, Duke Scott's our guy around the red zone, around the goal line," right?
Very similar to Utah and Bird Ficklin. Just annoyances these backup.
Yeah, it is. What about a couple of names that you're staying away from?
Yeah, I'll try and make these quicker. Mark Fletcher, I'm completely out on, just because I shouldn't say completely out if he falls. Of course I would take him, but I'm out as like a top 4 round running back. He's RB 27 in ADP. I do have him at RB 34, so not a drastic difference, but he obviously had a big year, over 1,100 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns if you include the playoff. But you just look at the two differences, right? Averaged 19 carries a game in those 4 playoff games for Miami. Only 14 carries in the 10 games that he played in the regular season. Shamar Brown's back, Jordan Lyle's back, Gerard Pringle's back. They have all their horses in that stable. And I think an underrated part that I haven't seen or haven't heard mentioned previously, Shannon Dawson, if you look back at Houston and in his early time at Miami too, he almost always prefers a committee approach, right? The RB1 only averages around 12 attempts per game if you date back to 2020 until now. So that's his preference is typically a committee, and all four running backs are back there for Miami.
Yeah.
So
The only thing about Fletcher that I do like, because I do have him ranked a little bit higher than you, is the thing that really jumped out at me in the college football playoff last year. And that was, boy, it was very noticeable. He got better and stronger as the game went on and he got more touches. To your point, deep backfield, will they allow him to get that many touches? Because they won't necessarily probably need him in the regular season, but you never know if they decide to ride him. And if they do, he's definitely going to be worth the value of where you get him. But to your point, Miami's got a deep backfield, right? They're going
yeah,
to use a number of bodies throughout the regular season.
and they have the recruiting to make up for this, so I can't say that it's going to be a weakness, but just should be noted that they
But
only bring back one starter from last year's
But you
offensive
know what?
line.
That's the reason I'll throw out a quick name here. For me, it's Bo Jackson at Ohio State, and it's like I like him, but I don't really necessarily love him because I don't know if I see that elite level fantasy cap on him. Because I always caution myself because it just seems like the Buckeyes have a couple of horses in the stable, and I'm just worried that he's not going to get the workload in some of these games when Ohio State goes up 35-7. I just worry that he's not going to get enough touches in some weeks to put up some big numbers. And he's a talented running back, and I think he's going to be solid in like traditional leagues, right? In your traditional formats. But man, I just worry about the weekly consistent are those 20 plus games going to be there? And I'm just not certain with him. That's the guy that I see. I just don't have any shares of Bo Jackson. I don't know why, but it's the one thing that I think about before drafting him.
Yeah, I much more prefer Bo Jackson in a best ball versus a redraft.
Yep.
Real quick, one last guy that I wanted to cover off on. I don't know if you had one more too, but Justice Haynes, I'm a little
Yep.
tentative on as well. Obviously, I saw him at Michigan last year, was incredible in the 7 games that he played. But coming over to Georgia Tech, coming off the injury, he should be fine. But you have a new offensive coordinator in
Yes.
George Godsey coming over from the NFL, where he was primarily a position coach. I think he maybe had 1 to 2 years as an offensive coordinator, but we have zero tendency data on how he prefers to use his running backs. And then he had a quote, or I believe in the spring, where it said, Godsey's big on a two-back system. Now, what does that mean? Are both running backs on the field? Does he want to split carries? Just you see and read stuff like that, and you're just hesitant that he's going to have a heavy workload. Talented player, obviously, but I mean they've split carries between who's the guy last year, Jamal something. They've split carries at Georgia Tech the last few years, and they bring back a really talented backup in Malachi Hosley, who averaged over
Yes.
7 yards a carry last year. So there's very good chance that they split that backfield 50-50.
Yep. So let's move on to the mid rounds. And when I say mid rounds, Mike, I don't mean like if you're in a 30 round draft, rounds like 15 to 20, right? These are guys kind of post the 5 rounds that we were talking about, right? Because we spoke about how the drafts are really heavy at the top. What does that mean? That means you're looking at 20 running backs probably coming off the board within the first 3 rounds, right? So these are the guys that are going to be there maybe around 5-ish or so. What's a name that you're looking at around once when the draft gets there that's really you're magnetized?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'll talk about mine that are like more in the round 10 range because I do
Okay.
compete in a lot of those the 30 round best balls. One name that is kind of popping for me semi recently is DJ Scott from North Dakota State, and we had a couple questions in the Discord because they're new to the FBS, and people haven't necessarily done all the research on these teams. But Scott, he tops the list for me. He was served as the RB2 last year. He had 501 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns. There's a lot of vacated carries, over 300 vacated carries between last year's starting running back and the quarterback. And if you look at PFF, Scott's advanced stats are kind of are pretty in line with last year's starter. They had the same yards per carry average. Scott averaged more yards after contact, similar breakaway rush rate. So, confident that he can at least, try come close to replicating the production from last year. He was listed second team All Mountain West by Phil Steele, so you'll always like to see that. And we had a phone call last night. Me and you were talking about North Dakota State. That schedule is incredibly appealing for North Dakota State if they can, level up to FBS football. 0 P4 opponents on that schedule. You created the heat maps. It is all green for the most part with North Dakota State. So you really like to see that.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's a name that's going to work its way up draft boards as we get closer to Labor Day over the next 3 weeks. Even we have a tendency to kind of buy into the fever as well. Wouldn't even be surprised if you and I start moving them up our draft boards a little bit, because once when we get the preseason fantasy draft guide baked in, we start really kind of going into even deeper dives. We start looking into where we have people and like, do we want to cement them there or do we want to? So, it's the great thing about staying fluid with everything as news comes in and as you and I get these feelings. That's a player I have a feeling that you and I may even move up our draft boards a little bit over the next couple of weeks. So really like that name. For me, I'm going to stay a little bit more grounded, kind of in that 5 to 8 range. So where you were at in round 10. And for me, it's just high upside names, right? And so I'm throwing out there Dylan Riley at Boise State. And the reason I throw him out there, because I've got 2 names right here, and that is both of them that I have are going to have sort of that 1B back in the backfield, right? And so you've got Dylan Riley, who finished with 1,100 yards last year, had 195 carries. Now, that was in 14 games, right? So he averaged about 14 attempts a game. But some of those games, he really went off, had double-digit touchdowns. Sire Gaines still had 161 rush attempts last year. So we know the Boise identity, they're going to give those guys touches. But man, Dylan Riley just looked a little more special with the ball in his hands. And it felt like watching Boise State last year, Sire Gaines, they tried to use him a little bit more, particularly early on, short yardage situations. I know we had him at running back 1 last year. I think it was the opener last year. I forget, maybe Boise lost at South Florida. I can't remember the game.
Yep.
Gaines had the fumble inside the 1-yard line. And it just opened the door for Dylan Riley. And man, he just blew the doors off when he had the opportunity. And I just feel like he's going to build off of that year. And when you get out of getting your first 2 to 3 running backs on the roster, or even your first couple, man, I'm going for high upside after that. And Gaines has, Riley has that ability, because he did it last year, to give you some really big output.
Yeah, it's another situation. I really like Riley too. He's obviously a top 25 running back for me. It's one of those, I like it in a best ball better than a redraft. I think you would agree with that. It's just, if they have that depth with Gaines and a couple of the transfers brought in, like, is it possible that they could rotate at some point? So I don't want to have to worry about that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But he got and here's why. At the end of the year, 3 of the last 5 games, Mike, he got the ball 20 plus times on the ground. They started feeding him at the tail end of the season right there. And for me, I don't know, like, I kind of look at some of those things as a precursor of things to come. And I just feel like the upside right there is for him. It's there at that value.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Who else did you have?
I had Jordan Davison for Oregon. And again, I talked about where these guys are going to kind of be 1A and 1B, and we know that we have D'Air Hill there as well, right? There's a lot of folks that kind of consider this duo sort of, thunder and lightning, right? But Jordan Davison last year, he had 15 touchdowns on the ground. I could be wrong. I'd have to pull up the stats. It felt like he almost had a rushing touchdown in every game last year, maybe all but a couple of games in the regular season. And so we know that those 2 guys are definitely going to get touches. Davison's more of the Thunder guy. So I like the fact that he's probably not only going to get a lot of touches, he's playing in Oregon's offense, very experienced. You've got Dante Moore coming back at quarterback. Oregon's going to be very good once again, and they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. And this probably, he's likely going to be the goal line guy again, right? So to think 15, if you're thinking 15 touchdowns for Davison, I don't think that's out of the range. The question is how's his yardage going to look like with the air hill as well? Again, I love the upside knowing that he's going to give you almost a guaranteed 6 points on the ground every single week. And if you're getting him in that 5-ish, 6th, 7th round range, which I don't think he's going that late, but somewhere around there, I just like the value at him right there outside of the top 3 rounds.
Oh, you'd be surprised, Joe. He's going around 8 or 9. I've seen it some, and you're getting these folks. I know who's hyping him up in the CFF community, but you're getting folks drafting De'Aaron Hill ahead of Jordan Davison at this point. I don't agree per se with that. There's 123 vacated carries, obviously with Noah Whittington no longer around. So De'Aaron Hill's probably going to assume a good chunk of that, and same with Davidson. But man, you look at those red zone carries again, and that's what we want, right? We want these guys that are going to score the touchdowns. And it was a 31-16 advantage for Davidson over Noah Whittington, and De'Aaron Hill only had 9 red zone rushing attempts last year. So I want the guy that'll score points more often than not, and I think that'll be Davidson over De'Aaron Hill personally, right? But I mean, like you said, this offense is going to score. I don't think the depth behind them is very good this year.
Well, Limar transferred, so he's out, right? He had the 3rd most rush attempts, I believe, last year on the team.
Yeah, and Dante Moore is not really going to threaten for too many rushing touchdowns. I think it is going to be centralized between those two more often than last year. But I agree with you that I like Davidson over De'Aaron Hill this year.
Who's another running back you're looking at that you've been kind of putting some eyes on?
Well, yeah, this guy's, I don't know, it's kind of, I shouldn't say overboard, but he is just steadily rising in every single draft that I've done at this point, whether that's, best ball, underdog, P4, whatever. It's Marcellus Hawkins from Virginia Tech. And I think he was just undervalued immensely at the start of the offseason. He had the red flag on Fantrax. There wasn't a lot of specificity on his injury in the spring, but he seems to be healthy now. The offensive line is going to be a veteran group. Over 80% of the snaps are returning from last year. And then, I mean, it's the Penn State coaching staff coming over, right? And they split from time to time, between their top 2 running backs. But man, you're getting at least a top 40 running back over the last 4 years, double-digit rushing touchdowns. Like, that's been a constant behind James Franklin, the new head coach, obviously, and Ty Howell, the offensive coordinator. So his ADP is rising immensely. He just got drafted, I think, around 11 in my latest best ball. So that's a guy that I think you're going to have to go up to grab as we progress in the summer.
Well, we talked about it. Again, you're playing in the ACC, and now it feels like as the days wear on, more solidified running back one feature back. Feels like it feels better now than it even did a few weeks ago when we launched the guide.
Yeah.
What about anyone in this area that you're kind of shying away from, or you're going to kind of wave the caution flag?
Yeah, 2 of them that I haven't been on. I know folks are high on Dwan Williams from Maryland, but I just can't. I can't get on with that. I can't buy it. Maybe that's just because I root for a Big Ten team and I've seen Maryland too much. They have the worst coach in the Big Ten, right? And they are horrific running the football. They've been bottom 3rd in the Big Ten in 3 of the last 4 years in running the football. Now, if you want to look at the positives, he is an absolute demon in the passing game, catching the ball at a backfield. So if you're in a PPR, like full point PPR format, I get it. And then the other thing working in his favor is the new OC being brought in, Clint Trickett, who obviously coached Cam Cook last year over at Jacksonville State. And when he has a guy over the last few years, dating back to Marshall, right? Rasheen Ali, Kalen Laborn, like he's going to feed them. I just don't see that happening at Maryland because it rarely has under this coaching staff. I don't trust Maryland to be very good this year. So, works in his favor for PPR points, but I don't know that he's going to get the
PPR,
necessary.
yeah, PPR in the first, if you look at the first 4, 5 weeks of the schedule, which it
Yeah.
always seems to be the case with Maryland, like the non-con is where you're going to get the value. So
Yep.
Dewan Williams, I would argue if you go there, you're going to get 4 good games out of him. He's going to be a dual threat monster. He might be able to roll up some points for you, and then you could flip him and bargain him for some trades.
I think that's a perfect, yes,
Do you
perfect
have the
analogy.
schedule
Perfect.
there in
Yes.
front? Do you have the schedule there in front of you for Maryland?
I can pull it up if you give me a
I
second
just
here.
remember that schedule for Maryland being really sweet on the front
It
end.
is always soft in the first couple weeks, but so Hampton, Hampshire, FCS team, then UConn, then it stiffens up a little bit. You get Virginia Tech, UCLA, Nebraska. So
Okay.
I think you're going to get some people in those first two games. They're going to be like, yeah, I was right on Tawan Williams. You suck, Mike. You were wrong or whatever. And then, yeah, then we'll see what happens when they get into Big Ten play.
And yeah, the meat of the schedule. Go check out their schedule heat map grid that we posted on the
Yeah.
site, and you'll see why when the schedule stiffens up there at the end.
Real quick, one last point that I wanted to make on Dewan Williams. So, yeah, it could work out in his favor that Clint Trickett is now the offensive coordinator. But what I read in the spring is that Mike Loxley, who was a previous offensive coordinator in the past, that he's still going to have his hands heavily on the playbook, the offense. He's going to have a major influence, and I don't think that's a good thing for for the Maryland offense or the running game, as we've seen in years past. So, if he falls beyond round 10, I can't hate it,
Yeah.
especially in a full point PPR format. But I've seen him go as high as round 6, and I absolutely cannot get there.
You have another name?
Yeah, real quick, Turbo Richard for Indiana. I don't see the upside. It's maybe in a best ball, but you're gonna play, roulette if you draft him in a redraft format. Indiana's gonna score points, but there's the
Kobe Martin.
Kobe Martin, the sophomore, and then Lee Beebe
Lee
still
Beebe.
around. He was awesome in the first 3 weeks of last year before his injury. They're going to rotate 3 running backs. You're going to play a guessing game with that
Yeah,
Indiana.
my two, one Kyson Brown, and I was high on Kyson Brown last year. Opened up as the starter, got injured. Raleek Brown took over, parlayed the success there into a bag of money over at Texas. And look, I think everything's there for Kyson Brown to be a really good fantasy back at Arizona State. Just wonder whether or not he can stay healthy. And there's some other backs on that roster there. Young talented back Carde Mack, I believe, is a name to kind of keep an eye on. And there's just some other names. And man, I love the offense for a running back there. But man, he'd have to stay healthy. But if he ends up being running back 1 and does stay healthy for 12 games, he will far exceed where you and I both have him ranked. But that's why there is a little hesitation on moving him too far up the ladder. And the other name for me is just Joe Jackson, the running back at Kansas State. I know he played well at the end of the year last year. He didn't really do anything for my eyes last year watching Kansas State on a whole. And I just wonder with Colin Klein coming in, is he going to kind of set a new standard over there? And will he identify a back? And so it just scares me a little bit jumping on Joe Jackson as I felt it would have been a little bit safer with Chris Kleiman had he stayed over there. I just wondered if Klein's going to shake some things up.
Yeah, you always run the risk of new coaching staff, new set of eyes, right? New opinions. So I just found it interesting too. I'm kind of shy on Joe Jackson this year too. I just found it interesting, mainly on 3, that they mentioned Rodney Fields, the Oklahoma State transfer, and Oregon transfer Jay Harris. They mentioned those two a lot more than they did Joe Jackson. So I'm shy to draft him in the top 5 rounds.
Yeah, so we get into later rounds. This is where everybody starts kind of turning up the volume a little bit as we get some of the our sleeper names for the later rounds. Why don't you start us off there? Who's somebody you're targeting later in drafts that really kind of like I'm taking a shot with this guy.
Khalil Valentine for Illinois, still going 20th round or later. And I get it because Illinois has been an absolute wasteland the last handful of years. We thought we were going to have it golden at Illinois with Barry Lunney, the offensive coordinator, came over from UTSA. Obviously had Sincere McCormick those couple of years that he was coaching him way back when. And then his first year was Chase Brown, who rushed for over 1,000 yards on a boatload of carries, and then nothing. Right? It's been I think RB1's averaged like 119 carries over the last 3 years. Um, but it's been a three-way backfield, and I think it's a two-man backfield this year between Aiden Laffery and Khalil
Yeah, I
Valentine,
agree.
with Caden Fegan moving over to tight end. So, I was looking, I've always been high on Khalil Valentine, but, just reading some of the reports, coming out of the spring or even most recently, the 247 beat writer for Illinois said if there is an all Big Ten caliber player on this offense, it is going to be Khalil Valentine. I think they're going to lean on him a little bit more now. You're obviously changing quarterbacks from Luke Altmaier to Caden Hauser. There's a couple new receivers there, so you don't know how that
Yeah.
passing game's going to gel. And Valentine's been a productive player the last handful of years, so I think they're going to start to lean on that running game a little bit more and lean on Valentine over Lafferty.
Yeah, what's interesting is that when I had written down my list before you sent me yours, and I had Valentine written as well. I changed it just so we could have some different names on there. So I'm on board with that as well. I think he's a standout on that offense this year, and they're going to have to ride him in the backfield. So I switched it up a little bit. I went with George Pettaway at James Madison. And what I like about Pettaway is he kind of got dinged up. Wayne Knight took over as the starter last year, never looked back. He's now at UCLA. You got to remember, George Pettaway ran for over 900 yards and led James Madison in rushing 2 years ago. And even though the head coach has moved on to UCLA, you've got Billy Napier coming over from Florida. Well, Billy Napier's MO over his career has been to run the ball, right? And so if Pettaway stays healthy, I think he's in a prime position as running back one at James Madison to really get over that 1,000 yard mark, challenge double digit touchdowns. And I think he has that potential late in drafts. I really like the upside with where he's likely to be drafted in college drafts this year.
Yeah, he sounds motivated too, just listening to the G5 Hive, G6 Hive. Their beat writer was talking about him. He felt slighted when, Wayne Knight took over that job last year, and he's coming into this year very motivated.
Yeah, and the second name for me, Mike, is just Quentin Jackson. Had nearly 900 yards rushing last year, led Rice in rushing. I kind of feel with that staff, Rice will be somewhat improved this year. I don't think they're still going to be great, but I think they'll be a little bit better. And I think you've got 1,000 yard potential again, with the possible of another 8 to 10 touchdowns. And again, late in drafts, that might give some folks some consistency, or this is a player that you may target on the free agency on the waiver wire as the season progresses and Rice moves into that conference schedule. But I like Quentin Jackson this year.
Yeah, for sure. He had a 50-point performance last year. He had a really big game rushing, and then I think he had over 80 yards receiving and three touchdowns. So there is some good upside. I think Ja'Curry Brown is going to help that offense overall for Rice there.
What about a couple of names for you, man?
Micah Ford for Stanford, wasn't overly impressive last year. 635 yards on 143 carries, averaged just 4.5 yards per attempt. But he did show he could be a workhorse at times. He had 26 carries in the opener against Hawaii, carried the ball 27 times in the season finale against Cal. The part that I'm really interested here is that if the coaching tendencies of new head coach Tavita Pritchard translate over this year to when he was at Stanford previously, because if that is the case, you had a boatload of workhorse running backs. I'm sure you remember these names: Bryce Love,
Oh yeah.
Austin Jones, Cam Scarlett. All those guys average right around 16 carries per game, if not more. They got 4 starters back along the offensive line, and I can tell you this for certain: Stanford is not going to put the ball in Davis Warren's hands this year, okay? Michigan actively took the ball out of his hands when he was unfortunately the starter for the Wolverines. So I think they could potentially lean on Micah Ford this year in that backfield.
I like that. They just have to stay in games. You
Uh,
got
they did. They did last year. They were impressed. I should say
as
at
the
times
season
they did.
progressed,
Yeah.
they played they got better, no
Yeah.
doubt, for sure.
Yeah.
You got a second name in there?
Yeah, the one guy that I'm hesitant on as a sleeper, you might actually disagree with this one, is Trey Cornice from Connecticut. I know he got the quotes coming out of the spring from head coach Jason Candle. I should set the stage just a little bit. Trey Cornice transfers over from Central Michigan, was a productive running back there. But Jason Candle, the former head coach from Toledo, now at UConn, uh, called Trey Cornice a potential 3-down running back. And I know we both took note of that quote coming out of the spring. But there's 4 other transfers that came in along with Cornice at running back for UConn this year. And I hate those situations when you have that much uncertainty, right? You got 4 transfers that could potentially play a role, if not start, in that offense. One of which being Kenji Christian, who came over with the coaching staff from Toledo. And we talk about in the past how like Jason Candle, Toledo, oh man, they've always had a good, running back or whatever. Bryant Koback comes to name, right? But it's been very hit or miss. If they don't have a guy and he's not rushing for 1,000 yards, then it's like 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, just as an example from the RB1 there under Jason Candle. So if they don't have a guy, it's usually a split workload, and they're not very good running the football. So Trey Cornice is just a guy that I'm not really drafting, even though he's going fairly late. I just can see that going in a lot of directions there.
Yeah, one name for me is just Dylan Edwards, and I think a lot of it is we talked about this at the top of the show with the proof is in the pudding, and I think everyone can be, or there are some people that are kind of enamored by his athleticism and his, he can be electric with the ball in his hands, but he's played 3 seasons and has totaled 180 rush attempts. So it's not like he's really done anything to say this guy's going to be a go-to back that they're going to feed and he's going to finish with over 150 rush attempts for the year. He's more of a dual purpose back. I see that's how he'll likely get used at Kansas. But it's just a guy that, still kind of has his name is still magnetizing, and his name has some fantasy appeal, and people kind of like that type of player. But for me, I'm not feeling anything that really makes me want to take anything and touch Dylan Edwards anywhere late in drafts.
Yassine Willis is 60 pounds heavier than Dylan Edwards. Who's getting the goal line carries between those two?
Yeah. And they brought in Willis from Syracuse. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still pissed that Dylan Edwards lost me all that money. And do you remember the Kansas State, Iowa State game last year where he comes out on a punt return or whatever? He barely got touched, man.
So before we get into some quick hitters to end this real quick, Mike, kind of touch on real quick some of the running back position battles that we're going to kind of be keeping tabs on throughout the summer, throughout preseason camp, whether it's listening to media days or following practices leading up to the season. Where are your eyes at?
Yeah, I'll try and quick hit some of these. Arizona State, you mentioned it already. If they find a guy, they will always ride him under Marcus Arroyo, the offensive coordinator. Cam Scatabo, right? And just that name comes to mind. They've had multiple 200 plus carry backs under his direction, even dating back to his previous stops at UNLV. I thought the one interesting part with Arizona State is that Kyson Brown was at media days. So maybe that looks good. That the coaching staff wants to bring him along there. So we'll be watching that position battle. Liberty is the one that we're going to be very much so keen on in the fall camp. Kanye Udo's in the mix, our projected starter. Peyton Jones, Cam
Yep.
Davis, couple transfers. They're going to be in the mix for that B back position, not the A back, right?
Right.
In that Liberty offense. Interesting there is that the last two, leading rushers for Liberty, um, were both ACC transfers, and Cam Davis and Peyton Jones now with Liberty are ACC transfers. Maybe there's a correlation, maybe there's not. We'll see with that. Texas, Hollywood Smothers, and Raleek Brown.
Yeah.
You could argue this one may not even matter who comes out on top. I think the Sark RB1 might be dead at this point. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think we're aligned there.
Yeah. I brought this up on a previous podcast. If you look at the red zone carries again last year, Trey Wisner had 12, CJ Baxter had 13, Arch Manning had 20.
Right.
So, once they get into the red zone, maybe they're going to feed their Heisman hopeful in Arch
And
Manning.
how we've kind of broken the mold from historical Steve Sarkisian running back ones, right?
It's a new day and age, man.
This is why you can never necessarily draft based on systems because now systems are evolving.
Well, yes, systems are evolving. We talked about this, last year, maybe even 2 years ago. It's changing with the college football playoffs.
Yep.
Texas, Miami, these guys want to preserve these running backs until they, because they're going to play 14,
Case
15
in
games.
point, Mark Fletcher last year. We talked
Mark
about
Fletcher
how
last
deep
year.
Miami is. So that, it kind of underscores the point you made about Mark Fletcher.
Yep. Couple lesser ones we're going to be looking at Virginia just because of the success that Jamari Taylor had last year. Florida State, Usman Kroma versus Trey Wisner. UCLA, Anthony Woods versus Wayne Knight. That'll be one. And LSU, I think that's a big one too. Maybe you can speak on it a little bit more, but we got three contenders: Harlan Berry, Dylan Jones, Caden Durham.
Yeah, you were big on, you'd read a lot of stuff about Dylan Jones in the spring. I'm being down here, not far from where Harlan Berry played high school ball. He played in the lowest classification. Seemed like he needed some time to adjust last year. I know I was kind of telling you that leading into last season. Like, this guy's making a huge jump. He's got the athleticism. He's probably going to be okay in year two. And I think because of where he was recruited and most likely because of what they're paying him, he's going to get every opportunity to shine in Lane Kiffin's offense. But boy, if you're going to be a running back in Lane Kiffin's offense, you've got to do two things. You've got to be able to take a pounding and you've got to be able to hold on to the ball.
And he's not the biggest
He's not
guy.
He's not. So we'll see how that plays out. But we are both on the train that there's very good reason to believe that LSU's offense is going to be very good.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I think those ones are the ones that we're going to be looking at.
And then we hit Florida State too, real quick. Just Usman and Wisner, right? So
yeah, I mean that. I do like Chroma. He's going in, beyond round 22, so that kind of fits in your sleeper mold. But they're replacing all five starters, and that could go south in a hurry there in Florida State. So,
all right, Mike. So for the sake of time, we're going to kind of do some quick hitters here and get on out and wrap up this running back show. But running back drafted in the first two rounds, most likely to bust. Who's your name there?
Well, I added a caveat to you cannot pick Ahmad Hardy.
Okay.
So I'm going with Justice Haynes, right? I think just the change in offensive coordinator, you don't know the tendencies. Malachi Hosley was, very good last year as the backup. I think they split carries. The name that I forgot earlier was Jamal Haynes, obviously the starter the last 3 years too. He never had more than 150 carries, I don't believe so.
The one name for me is a kid that played 10 minutes from my house too, and he did play in the highest classification, so he did play against good talent, but he got 200 rush attempts last year, and honestly, I was just surprised at how well he was. He's up in my top 10 rankings too. And look, the pedigree's there because his older brother was a really good receiver at Vanderbilt and Colorado, but it's Nate Shepard, the running back for Duke. And I only say that because I just wonder how good Duke's going to be this year. ACC champions last year. Mensa leaves to go to Miami, and he's the one guy that I have in my top 10 that I'm really worried about. And we referenced this with another player too. You got PPR potential there with Nate Shepard too. I just wonder or worry whether Duke's going to be as good as they were last year, and he's going to be able to get the touches that he had last year, which I think he went over 230 on the total touches last year.
Yeah, I share some of the same concerns. The one thing that you do like to hear at least is that most of the quotes coming out of the spring is like, hey, we are going to feature this guy,
Yeah,
which makes sense, right? He's easily their best player on offense.
correct. Yeah, no doubt. Running back competition we are focused on that ends up being insignificant.
Virginia. I've said this one on another podcast with our friend Josh over at Fantasy Points, but I'm just not a believer that, just because Jamari Taylor rushed for 1,000 yards last year, that we're going to have a guy that's going to rush for 1,000 yards this year. That team was awful running the football under this coaching staff the previous 3 years up until last year. Now, they do have three starters back along the offensive line, so that does help. But I'm kind of worried about that offense overall. Bo Prabula is going to be the starting quarterback, not the best passer, and will also factor into the running game. So how many touchdowns does he vulture away from the running backs? Because he'll run the ball more than Chandler Morris did last year. So my bet is that there is not a fantasy relevant running back at Virginia.
I'm going to go with Florida State. I just think Mike Norvell's on the hot seat. Chroma, Wisner. I'm just not sure if one guy's going to really stand out because I'm not sure Florida State's offense is going to be very good. And so that's a position battle that I think we'll be watching. But I think in the end, I don't think it's going to end up being significant enough for me to put enough eyes on. We'll see how that turns out. This year's Kewan Lacey, Mike, who is it this year for you?
Kyson Brown, we already covered that. But if whoever comes out at Arizona State as that RB1, I think they could obviously be a top 10 running back. The other one was Liberty, right? 4 1,000-yard rushers in the last 5 years, 5 in the last 7 years. And then 6 of those rushers in those 7 years had double-digit touchdowns. It's a proven system. We saw Evan Dickens last year. So whoever comes out on top between Udo, Peyton Jones, or Cam Davis, I think they are going to be, obviously really good.
For me, this is the way I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to say Jamal Roberts, Missouri. I'm just going to say, what if Ahmad Hardy has a setback?
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're looking at possibly a top 5 running back in college fantasy football, right? So I'll just go there and say Jamal Roberts if there's a setback. It's something you and I talk about every year. Let me just say it while we're on the running backs here, is that there's a lot of position battles that happen, and particularly at running back when there's handcuff situations and there's a 1A and a 1B. We don't wish injury on anybody, but injuries can turn the tide on projecting a college fantasy football running back, and one injury to one of those handcuffs and that other guy all of a sudden vaults up the rankings. And so I just say Jamal Roberts has that potential if there happens to be some sort of a setback with Ahmad Hardy.
Yep.
Which running back are we overthinking the most that ends up being good in the end?
I went with Bo Jackson. You kind of covered off on some of the concerns with Bo Jackson. He didn't touch the ball, or he didn't have more than 15 carries in a game until mid-November last year. And there's a possibility we see the same thing again. They have Isaiah West in the backfield. They brought in Jacoby Jackson. Does he take on the CJ Donaldson role, where he had 10 rushing touchdowns last year? But then you flip it to the other side. It's Ohio State. They're going to score points, right? New offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith,
Yep.
Pretty sure he likes to run the football. So this could just be one where Bo Jackson's a really talented player. Ohio State's going to score points, and I haven't drafted him, so I could be overthinking that one. And we talked about this. We talked about this actually yesterday. They play Texas in week 2. Both you and I said last night on the phone that we think Texas wins that game. That could help Bo Jackson and Ohio State leaning on their best running back with one loss.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was something that we talked about yesterday. It happened last year with Notre Dame, so I'll just reference it again. As today's college football playoff structure, the way that it is in place, you can lose a game and still be okay, save your horses. But once when you go one down and you take a chance that losing that second game now, you have to start riding your horses, right? And so that's what Mike's referencing right there. For me, Mike, I just think as I look at the top of my list, the one that sometimes I think maybe I'm just overthinking at some point, it might be Jordan Marshall just running back at Michigan. There's a lot of hype around Savion Hyder coming in, the freshman, but man, like we talk about Notre Dame running backs and we're talking about Williams being a plug and play for the system, but Marshall's more of a proven he's more proven than Williams is, and I've got Williams one slot ahead of Marshall. Now that we've done this show and I'm starting to think about it, I may need to swap those two guys because maybe I'm just overthinking Jordan Marshall right now for Michigan because we know Michigan's going to run the ball.
I agree with that selection as a guy that we're potentially overthinking. I would probably leave Williams ahead of Marshall because think of the quarterbacks running, right? Underwood is going to run the ball 100 plus times, probably get 78 rushing touchdowns. That's not going to happen with CJ Carr, right?
Best transfer running back? Who you got?
Yeah, I kind of skipped the obvious names: Caleb Hawkins, Cam Cook. Those guys in the first round. We covered already. I think Kendrick Rayfield is going to have a really strong role with SMU this year.
Yeah, so look, I'll stay away from the obvious ones and I'll just go down the list of my players as well and just throw out Mekhi Hughes, reunited with his former coach from Tulane over at Houston now, probably going to get some touches there at Houston and is going to be fantasy relevant again. That's the hope, right? So let's end up on this one. Which running back drafted beyond round 20, best chance to finish as a top 20 running back to finish the year?
I'll let you take this because my dogs are barking.
Okay, wow. I've been really good at answering these questions while you've been looking up my answers while you've been kind of on the mic there. But man, I don't really.
They stop barking. I can answer this. Somebody just rang the doorbell.
No, I'm just looking best chance outside of round 20. I'm trying to find a different name that's outside of our sleepers, right? I've already kind of threw up Quentin Jackson that's out there. I mean, you could probably even make a case for a guy like, I don't know, would you consider maybe a Roderick Robinson of UAB if that UAB's defense is not going to be that good. And if he's the stud running back at UAB, I can see a guy like that possibly being there. But again, I've got like Petaway down at 77, right? He's there. Could Cedric Alexander at Vanderbilt now that he's kind of the feature back there and they maybe start a freshman? I don't know. That's where I have to turn to my sleeper list.
Sorry, I left you on the spot there. And for anybody watching on YouTube, I promise I don't abuse my dogs, but I was throwing pens at them to get them to stop barking. Of course, right when we're about to close up, somebody wants to ring our doorbell. Jeez. My answer here is Antonio Martin for Middle Tennessee. There is a question of if he's going to start this year. Some of the preseason magazines had DJ Taylor, who looked really good last year. Yeah. Rushed for 199 yards, averaged 7.7 yards per carry. They also brought in Terrence Brown from Southeast Louisiana. I'm sorry, not Southeast Louisiana, Saginaw State. He averaged 10.5 yards per carry last year. So maybe he's going to factor into the mix. But Antonio Martin is one of those guys that, we thought was just going to be potential top 20, like running back right off the bat because, he transfers into Middle Tennessee State. Their new offensive coordinator, Anthony Scalfo, comes over from Southeastern Louisiana. 2 years ago, Scalfo coached Antonio Martin at Southeast Louisiana, rushed for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns on 230 carries. So you would think that relationship would result in not only Antonio Martin starting, but obviously knowing the system, he should have a really strong season. Still a debate, I guess, based on if you want to believe preseason magazines, if he's going to start this year. But that's a guy who is familiar with the system, has already proven it, in past years with over 1,200 yards rushing back in 2024. So I think that's a guy with some high upside that could be a top 20 running back.
Okay, so now that you've now that you've given me time to scour my picks here, I'll throw one more name out there. Don Chaney, over at UL Monroe. How about that? Bryant Vincent over there as the head coach. We know he wants to pound the ball. We know he can ride a bell cow if he identifies one. They open up with Mississippi State to start the year, but you look at the schedule and it's green all the way through. Of course, they've got some of the tougher Sun Belt opponents, but they don't really play other than Mississippi State, no P4 opponents. And I could see that being a guy that if he can stay healthy, can get a healthy dose on a week-to-week basis.
I'm burnt by Louisiana Monroe running backs from last year. Hey, but we're not taking any info from any random uncles from certain players at Louisiana Monroe this year.
Right. That's right. That's right. So look, man, let's put a cap on this. So we threw out a bunch of names. I mean, we went a little bit deeper than I thought we were, went a little bit longer than I thought than we anticipated, but another great episode, and we're going to close things out next week with the receivers and tight ends. So any last parting words on the running backs that you want to throw out there that maybe you wanted to get, you don't want to leave anything on the table?
Get them fast, get them early. Don't leave, if you draft Ahmad Hardy, don't leave that draft without Jamal Roberts. And yeah, I mean, look, just the one thing I want to emphasize, those running back competitions, Liberty, Arizona State, even Middle Tennessee here, like those are the ones that we're really going to key on once fall camp start heating up here.
Yep, that's going to do it, man. Cap it off. For Mike Bainbridge, my partner, my name's Joe DeSalvo with the CFF site. The second of a three-part preseason preview series. We've done with the quarterbacks, running backs down now. One more show to go and more content to come on the site. So we'll see you guys on the next show. Till then.